Hi, um, my name's James Womack, and I am a poet and a translator from Spanish and from Russian. I have published 5 books so far with Carcanet, and I would like to talk a little bit about my 6th book, Why Are You Shouting?, which will be out soon. It's an odd book to talk about because it's the first book that I've ever written that feels in my mind complete and coherent as a book. But then if kind of anyone asks me what it's about, it's quite difficult for me to say. So it's a series of poems that deal with nostalgia, I suppose. There's a lot of stuff about childhood in it. It deals with ideas of the city. I found the word city coming up a lot, and one of the first poem is called The City, an Argument. It's a long poem, about 10 or 15 pages long. It's about climate change. I think it's impossible for writing nowadays not to be about climate change. So you might as well acknowledge that openly and actually write about it, rather than live in denial to the extent you can live in denial, which is not very far. It is a book about myth as well. I found myself writing a lot of poems inspired by figures from, in particular, Greek myth. I'm currently working on something a bit larger, very much inspired by bits of Euripides I've been reading, but this book is, maybe the first sort of choking steps towards what I'm currently writing. I mean, I always feel that. I think that what I'm writing in the present is, to some extent, a following on from things I've written in the past that then look like they're sort of slightly tentative things, taking me to where I am today. But yes, I don't know if that makes me. I mean, maybe I'm a bit like a shark. I've got to keep on moving. Maybe I'm not like a shark. I don't know. There's a poem about a shark, or a poem that mentions the idea of the shark having to keep on moving. It's also about a city. It's also got some bits of myth in it and bits of nostalgia. So yes, I think those are sort of the main things that the book's about. With the background, I mean, that's where the title comes in, with the background of finding it very difficult to communicate with each other. I think people are finding it more and more difficult to speak to one another and say things that make sense. And I want to address that in the book without really much hope of there being any answer to the issues that I raise. I put this book together a few years ago now. I said I was looking at some emails recently, and I think I sent it to Carcanet to see if they would like to publish it at the end of February 2022. But it has changed, I mean, over those 2 years, and in the 2 years preceding it, or 3 years, 5 years, I'm not sure. I see it very much as deriving from my last book, but one, which was called On Trust, A Book of Lies, and that came out in 2017. So maybe it's a 7-year project. I put it together, though, mostly over the winter of 2021. And I think the most important thing to say about that, and when I was putting it together, was that it was a time when, it was in the we all don't really want to remember, but it was in the pandemic, and it was there was a lot of other pressures that I was under. I'd recently kind of changed the job I was doing, and also my wife and I had a child who was born in May 2020, so when things were really kind of crazy. And in 2021 I suffered a period of burnout. I mean, I run the gamut of saying kind of, I had a mental breakdown, which is kind of the romantic way of saying it, or kind of I was working too much, which is probably the more accurate way of saying it. And I was signed off work for a couple of months, and that was very helpful. I'm very lucky to have a job that allowed me to, or employers who allowed me to take that time. And during those couple of months, I put the book together and wrote the last long poem in it. So there's a poem called Cassandra, which I wrote at that time, and which was very different from everything that I'd done before. And I think part of the reason why it was different was because of this kind of accordioning in my life. That there'd been lots and lots of pressure that I was under, and I sort of was working too much and I didn't have any time to write. And then I was signed off work for 2 months and had maybe too much time to write. And this long poem, which I'm particularly proud of, I think, was a result of that final sort of sudden release of various types of pressure, but then sort of an imposition of other types of pressure on myself for other reasons. It was an odd book to write. I think for the first time, again, the first time I've ever put a book together, it felt like I was writing a book. With my previous 2 collections of individual pieces, Misprint from 2012 and On Trust, A Book of Lies from 2017, began with poems, and then I had ideas about how they'd fit together, and then the story kind of created itself around them. My third book was a single long poem, sort of half a poem and half a translation, so that sort of doesn't really count. So this one was the first book that I felt, when I was putting it together, that it was actually a coherent piece of work in and of itself. And then, after submitting it, other poems appeared, and I think I probably was a very annoying writer. It was annoying for people to edit me, I think, because I kept on changing and transforming the book. I think it went through sort of two or three more sets of edits than any of my previous books had done. But I'm very pleased with the results, the way it's come out. And it felt, I've spoken about this a little bit earlier, but it felt like I was putting together something that was coherent and worked as a book. And one of the reasons that it does that is that there are three long poems in it. One called Summer Nights, one called The City, an Argument, that I mentioned before, one called Cassandra, which I've mentioned before, which I think are successful examples of a new way of thinking about writing that I hadn't really considered before. And that derived almost entirely from some of my teaching as a creative writing teacher on the creative writing MA at the University of Oxford. In particular, I was working with one of my students who had very interesting ideas about sort of combinatorial work in prose poetry. So the rules of a sestina, for example, which is a Latin poem with kind of sestina, not necessarily a Latin poem, an Italian form with repeated words at the end of lines, so it doesn't rhyme in any kind of traditional way, but it, the same words kind of crop up and so on. And I wondered about writing on a larger scale with ideas and themes that were repeated across the text. And I found that a very liberating and very invigorating way of writing. So I'm very grateful to my student, Siley Gore, who is named in the acknowledgements, and I think is kind of one of the fundamental, the work that she was doing has fundamentally kind of helped me put this book together. But actually, I mean, the final question, the final prompt I've been asked to respond to in this video is to ask if I've got a favourite piece in the new collection. And those three pieces, I think, are my three favourite. But they're very, very long, and I mean, they're worth reading. I think you should buy the book and read them, obviously, or get someone else to buy you the book and read them, or buy several copies and give them to all your friends so they can read it. All those kind of general things. But I think one of the ones, I think the one I like the best, as far as smaller pieces are concerned, is a very small one, which came to me in the circumstances that it describes. It's about writing a letter, and it kind of came to me as I was writing a letter. I was in Madrid, and my friends were not in Madrid. I was in Madrid and I thought I'd sort of send a postcard, and sort of ended up writing a letter, which I then kind of I can't remember what happened to it. I think I had some trouble getting the stamps in. I can't remember if I sent it or not. But it goes like this, and I'm sort of very pleased with it because I like things to feel complete, and quite a lot of the poems that I write don't feel complete. They feel like they're sort of they feel like they've sort of come to an end, and then maybe you can work on them a bit more later. But they sort of keep on coming to an end. Whereas this poem, I think, sort of begins and ends and does what it needs to do, and that's it. And I'll just read that at the end of this video. It's called "I Write You a Letter," and that's the title. It's one of these poems where the title's also the first line. I write you a letter. Over the long course of an afternoon, with the eggshell sky losing its colour, turning from blue to grey-black, all the light leaching from the world, until the world is black, and the letter is full of light. I think that's it. I hope you feel interested, and I hope you like the book.